Hello and welcome to the 24Connect podcast. This is the show that brings you inspiration from customer-obsessed leaders who are transforming and innovating customer contact. In this episode, we're talking to Chris Skinner, CEO at The Financer, author of best-selling books on digital banking, and one of the most influential people in Fintech. Together with 24/7 CEO Rutger, they talk digitization, AI, and the future of customer contact.
Chris, it's really great to have you on the podcast today.
Goedemiddag. That's as far as I go.
That was a decent start. Hey, Chris. Obviously, I checked out your LinkedIn, right? That's what we do. I noticed you introduce yourself as an author, as a speaker, but also as a troublemaker. And I was wondering, what's up with the troublemaker?
Well, I'm just told by many people that I lay bare the issues that are not usually talked about. So if I see an elephant in a room, I'll point at it and say, what's that doing there? And in fact, recently I've been writing about the elephant in the room quite a lot because that's the economy. But typically it's laying bare the issues that banks are grappling with and that others see opportunity with.
And what's the thing that keeps coming back? The issue you keep on bringing up that they say, like, now you're really starting to annoy me, Chris.
The primary one, I guess, is that banks' leadership teams don't understand technology enough. It's not in their DNA. And because of that, they will never succeed in becoming a digital bank. And it's explicitly demonstrated by the fact that bankers will not replace old systems. They just build around them, which means that they just have this mess behind the back room, which they need to get rid of.
Is there? I'm already skipping 7 topics ahead, but is there one particular, let's say, old bank that does really understand it very well?
Well, I picked on some banks for my last book doing digital, who I thought seemed to be trying to do digital transformation well, of which one was ING, who you'll know very well. But also BBVA, DBS, China Merchants Bank, and JP Morgan Chase. And I interviewed them all in depth, and I ended up getting about 40 different things that they all consistently were telling me. And the primary one is that the working out what to change and how to change to be digital is the hardest part.
Yeah. It's a cliche, but it's probably then also a culture thing. I
always say digital transformation is nothing about technology. It's about changing people's heads.
Yeah. Hey, 24 Sessions, we are a video banking platform. And I started this business in 2015. And back then, I thought I was pretty new with this concept. But I did some research. And in 2004, when I was in university, you already wrote about video banking. So what I'm curious about, why the hell did it take 17 years and a pandemic to actually make it take off?
Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that there are intuitive technologies that will succeed in becoming mainstream over time. Biometrics is another example. And, the fact that we had moved to telephone banking, then self-service, internet, and now mobile banking said that augmenting that with a human touch that's face-to-face is clearly appropriate. The reason why it took 17 years is that I don't think anybody was comfortable with the idea of moving to remote face-to-face dialogue until we were all locked down at home and working from home. And then suddenly it just shot through the roof, and now it's intuitive. And we're doing this podcast, and I can see your face, you can see mine. In pre-March 2020, we'd have just done this on a remote link with just audio. It's now something that people are just expecting. In fact, I did write something around Christmas around we need some video etiquette, in that if I don't want to show my face, and if I do want to sit here in my pajamas slurping coffee and spilling eggs down my front, that's my prerogative.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I know that we started doing video banking since 2015, and obviously we faced so much skepticism from actually mostly from users, banks, advisors, not so much from customers, even though customers also need to adopt. From day one, we've seen that customer satisfaction rates on video interactions were actually higher than face-to-face interactions. But still, it took a pandemic to sort of get people in that mental state that it is indeed just as good, as just as normal.
Yeah, and I think the critical thing now, and it's what I was writing about in 2004, is that video interaction needs to be automated. So we need to have avatar video customer service representatives who answer the majority of questions and only hand over to a human when it breaks outside the normal Q&A. So right now we have chatbots, but we'll have video bots very soon that do that job.
Yeah, yeah. How soon? Because chatbots, maybe we can talk about chatbots later on, but 10 years ago, we said chatbots would take over and they would be so smart. And my personal opinion, chatbots are not that smart yet. So how fast are we getting to let's say those video bots? What do you think?
Well, one of the sayings that we have at 11FS is that digital is only 1% done, which means there's 99% to go. And when we look at where we are with technology today, I keep pointing at, if your smartphone's battery runs out before you land on a jet, or if your PC crashes and you have to reboot, or if you find that you're in a conversation and then you lose the link halfway through, that shows we're still in a very basic environment of technology. 5G is just coming in. Things will always get faster and more sophisticated. And I always quote Arthur C. Clarke, which is any new technology must appear as though it's magic to be new technology. And so I was watching the other day on LinkedIn a ox breaking out of a shop window and in 3D, and it was literally like it was really there, but it's not. It's just made up. But that was like magic, and it's a bit like the first time you see The Matrix back at the end of the 90s, and slow-mo was suddenly in the cinema, and you're going, "That's magic." We still got a long way to go to get the magic right.
Yeah, we got it to work, right? We got it to work, but it's not magic.
No, it just looks like it at the time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Hey, and you already mentioned we're at 1% now. If you ask the same question to these banks, where would they assess themselves in their digital transformation? Would they assess themselves at 1%, 20%, 50%, 80%?
Oh, 80%, maybe higher. And a lot of it is, there's two surveys that I was using in the middle of the last decade, around 2015, just after you started your company. One is a survey where 76% of bankers believed that they had done digital, but they'd just rolled out a mobile app. They thought that's what digital was. And another survey that was from Gartner, I think it was, that stating 80% of banking executives believe that digital requires no change to the business model of the bank. And that's deranged. I mean, that's ridiculous, because the business model of the bank was designed for the Industrial Revolution, distributing physical bits of paper through buildings with humans. And now they're dealing with digital distribution of data through software and servers. It's a completely different business model.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, and AI, we already touched upon it indirectly, with talking about bots and technology and augmented stuff. Are there any banks currently using AI for customer contact or customer interaction purposes in a good way? Are there any good examples in that direction?
I don't have many within banks that are good illustrations of that. I have some in the Fintech community, particularly the one I keep coming back to is with Ant Group in China, which is the guys who run Alipay. Because most of the banks are using AI right now to reduce cost and reduce risk. And in the context of that, they're therefore using it for fraud, regulatory, and compliance areas. And my favorite bank example of AI is actually from a couple of years ago in JP Morgan, which is why they featured in the book Doing Digital. That's one of the reasons why, is that they had managed to eradicate over 360,000 hours of legal work using an AI engine to check wordings on commercial contracts, which means that a lot of lawyers can go on the redundancy queue, which I thought was quite a good thing. But they're not using it so much for customer-facing processes and services. But within the Ant Group, they talk a lot about customer intelligent marketing and customer intelligent service. And it's using the super app to provide that hop, skip, and a jump between commercial, social, and financial structures. Which now, in fact, I just read the other day that PayPal now wants to try and copy what they've done for the European and American markets. So I'm not sure whether they will succeed because of regulations, which is always something that gets in the way of these things. But it didn't in China because they were encouraging the way in which that was used. And it ends up that the key to the Ant Group structure is they have this business. So it's all part of Alibaba. And at the top end is the apps that become part of the super apps, social, commercial, and financial apps that give you all your entertainment, all your shopping, everything you need for living your life digitally. In the middle, they then have a whole range of companies that are platforms, from Alibaba Cloud through to the Ant Group payment services. But the one I like the best is the one that they talk about as their data layer, which is a platform sitting behind that consolidates all the customer data to get a enterprise single view of customer information. And they call it Ali Mama because Mama looks after Baba.
That's nice. That's nice, and that's this almost semantic view of the customer, right? So what's going on in his life? What does he worry about? What's going on? What is his ambition? I think they have a lot of data at their disposal, and I think those 3 layers you mentioned, it helps them a lot. At the same time, one thing that I always wonder about, like, let's take out the social stuff and like the third layer. Still already today, banks know so much of their customers, and I'm always surprised how little they actually use that knowledge and how basic their triggers are to interact with a customer. It's basically a big payment comes in, or you don't have any money anymore, and that's basically the 2 triggers that they use. But isn't there a lot of opportunity to improve actually with the data they already have?
Absolutely. I mean, going back to the Ant Group business, on Singles Day, November 2020, they were processing 512,000 transactions per second. Every single one with bulletproof AI bulletproof risk analytics through AI, and every single one adding to the enriched knowledge of the customer for the next sale. And they're on their 5th generation of systems architecture, so they've rebuilt their systems 5 times in 15 years. Every 3 years they rebuild their systems. Most banks have never rebuilt their systems ever since they put them in place in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And that's what I was saying at the start. They keep building on top of rotten systems. And those rotten systems are often very much product aligned and line of business focused. So they fragment the data into many different silo structures that are never consolidated and rationalized into that single view of the customer that Ant Group has and Amazon has and others have. And I liken it to, if Amazon was a bank and had been built like a bank's systems have been built, then Amazon Books would have its own data center and system separated from Amazon DVDs and Prime Video, separated from Amazon white goods sales, Amazon toy sales, Amazon clothes sales. They'd all have their separate system. It would be a mess.
And what's blocking, let's say, for example, European banks to be more like Alibaba? Is it purely regulations? Could Alibaba do what they do, but then in Europe?
It's nothing to do with regulations. It's to do with the lack of cojones of the management of the bank. They just don't have the ability to make the tough decisions to rip out and replace core systems. Again, I was just writing about this because the whole of the Federal Reserve System went down over the last week, last few days. You often see bank systems going down. You saw Citigroup just make a massive blunder with a payment because a subcontractor forgot to tick a box, and so they sent $1 billion out, and it was a mistake. They asked for the $1 billion back. They got 500 million back, and the rest is being lost. And the federal judges said tough, and that was all because they're using a system with a user interface that looks like it's from the 1990s. And as I'm recounting that, there's another thing I was talking about, which is Amazon and how they, by accident, almost created Amazon Web Services, which is they ripped out and replaced Sun systems in 2000 and put in HP Linux systems, which reduced their infrastructure costs by 80%, and then realized that for 46 weeks of the year, most of their capacity wasn't being used. So they said, why don't we rent it out to other companies if they need more capacity as a, on a pay-as-you-need basis, and that's now called Amazon Web Services. And right now, they're ripping out all of their database systems within Amazon and replacing them. Those are tough things to do. And I said Ant Group have rebuilt 5 times in 15 years. Amazon ripping out and replacing core infrastructure, core systems, core platforms to make them fit for the business needs they have in 2020 versus 2000. A bank just has to bite that bullet, and the management teams of banks just don't have the balls to do it.
And what about the challenger banks? What about those fintech banks that I think they hit the industry quite hard, quite fast, but maybe I'm wrong, but their overall real fundamental impact, is it really where we thought it would be? Why didn't they make the bridge to more fundamental services, such as mortgages, investment, those kind of services? Do you think that they will challenge those retail banks, or will it really come from the likes of Alibaba, Amazon, potentially Google?
Well, I just tempering the conversation a little bit into context is that for the whole of my career in financial services and technology, I've heard all the technologists always saying the banks will be destroyed and disintermediated by technology. And the banks just sit back and smile because it never has. Will it is still a question. Answer, probably not. The big tech companies will end up working with the big banks rather than trying to replace them. The challenger banks, I don't think, are really challenging the banks. I think they're doing some interesting, nifty things. But to get mass movement of customers from one traditional old bank to a new one is really difficult to do. And even if you do achieve it, what you tend to find is that people move the more perfunctory, less important things to the new bank and leave the nervous things like a mortgage or the big ticket items with the old bank.
And does it then come down to trust in the end?
Well, banks always talk about how customers trust them, but they don't trust their brand. They don't trust their management or their people. They trust the fact that the government says, if this goes bankrupt, you'll get your money back for up to €100,000.
That's true. But maybe then let's talk about trust maybe in a deeper layer. Does it then still, to some extent, when we talk about money, when we talk about investments, when we talk about getting a mortgage for my house, when I talk about all of these almost life-changing moments for people, does it then maybe come down to, in the end, I would still want to be able to talk to a person, to, even though I could theoretically do it myself with a click of a button, it's still nice that there's a person that helps me or that gives me this sense of trust.
Yes and no. I mean, it's more around your confidence and competence with money and technology. And if you look at most of the challenger banks, the average age of the customer is somewhere in their 40s. They've been around for a while using the products and services of finance, like a mortgage and a deposit account and loans and credit. They're also very comfortable with smartphone and internet technologies. And that mixture makes them more than confident and competent to look after their money themselves. But if I roll back to the first time I ever needed to get a bank account or a loan or to buy a house, it's a very nerve-wracking thing when you're quite young because you've never done it before, and particularly when it's some of the biggest things in your life, buying your first car, getting your first home.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the nerves around that means that you do need some face-to-face direct interaction, and I don't think that's going to go away. It can be done over video to your business. And as you get more confident, it can be done without any human interaction. So my last mortgage I got with just text messaging. Great. But but that's unusual. I don't think somebody who is getting their first house would feel as confident and competent doing it that way.
Yeah. So what is the role of the advisor? Let's say in 5 or in 10 years, what's the role of the advisor, and how would it have changed if you compare it to the current situation?
I think if we go back to trust, do we trust people in banks to give us the right advice on loans, mortgages, insurances? And the answer is probably no. Or if your answer is yes, then you need some education, because most banks are not there to serve the interest of the customer. They're there to make profit for the bank. And the theme I'm working on, and it's come very much from the fintech community and the challenger bank community, is that over the next decades, starting now, the institutions that serve customers, particularly millennials, Gen Z, and the iGen, will look for organizations, not just banks, any organization, whether it be their government or their shops or their financial providers, to have a clear purpose and values that are demonstrable, that they can relate to. So Monzo, who I just interviewed for the book, because the new book is talking about digital for good, and it's all about if you don't stand for something, you fall down. So what do you stand for? And it's about stakeholder capitalism rather than shareholder capitalism. So in the last decades, banks have clearly been there to make money for shareholders, not in the interests of the customer. And they've been accused of being socially useless, whereas they need to be socially useful. So how can they become socially useful? And that's a massive ask and change culturally, along with digital transformation. In fact, digital is something that plays into this, because digital brings down the barriers of deception, because you become far more transparent through the internet and through what people share on the internet, both socially and through other medium. So over the next decade, particularly, I think we'll start seeing a lot more activism amongst investors and customers and employees to say, firstly, I want to see more stakeholder contribution from your company. Secondly, I want your company to tell me what you stand for and what your values are about and how you're doing good for the planet and good for society. And if you can't demonstrate that purposefully, then you don't have a purpose.
Do you have a bank where you're seeing, let's say, the first steps in this direction, or maybe if there's another bank that comes to mind, a different large organization that works really purpose driven?
Well, I mean, the idea has been bubbling in my head for a quarter of a century, because I did a lot of work on community currencies in the 1990s, which is a specific area of finance that hasn't really taken off, but maybe it will one day, which is invest for the long term and spend the money now rather than save the money now and deal earning in the short term, which is how we live in our current financial markets. But then it came to a head with the financial crisis, which is when we went through this morally reprehensible moment where we realized that bankers didn't give a whatever about the world and were bailed out. And that was a bailout of the banks. In the pandemic, we needed a bailout of the people. And that's what we've seen governments trying to do. And now we're saying, where does that take us next? And in fact, the main people who inspired me to thinking around this way come from the Benelux countries. So community currencies was a gentleman who unfortunately has passed, Bernard Lietaer, who was a professor in Belgium, who also was the guy who came up with the idea of the euro. Woohoo! Just what equally, Triodos Bank has been heavily involved in this, and they're friends of mine, and they're writing a chapter towards the book. Rabobank are also champions in this area, and believe very truly that you have to have a community role. And bearing in mind that Rabobank is the farmers' bank, it came from community. That's what they stand for. So there's a lot of banks like this. In fact, there's a fantastic bank in Finland called Arlandsbanken, and they came up with this idea of a green index where every time you spend money, you can see what impact that has on the environment and the planet. And they've now originally used that for their own credit card to save the Baltic Sea, but it's now being used by over 100 million people through a white labeling agreement around the world with other banks. And these are fantastic initiatives.
I'm happy you mentioned Rabobank. It's one of our customers, and they I think they are very, very advanced in implementing video banking, and I also really love that they bring back some of their heritage. So the sense of community, indeed the farmers, the farmer spirit, all of that. But in the end, how um, could a bank charge more theoretically if they are more purpose driven, or is it more you have to be on a level playing field on the basics and then you win with purpose?
I think it's more that you wouldn't necessarily charge more, but you might give customers the option to donate towards the purpose more.
Yeah.
There's some
Right.
great programs, one of which is called Roundup, where every time you spend something, it gets rounded up to the next nearest
Yeah.
single unit. So the next nearest euro, rather than you spent 21.59 euros, 40.41 cents of that euro goes towards your purpose cause. And it will differentiate banks in terms of saying, that there are going to be institutions that people naturally want to be with because
Mhm.
they like their purpose, what they stand for. But that's not there right now. It
No,
will
but
happen.
yeah. And then indeed, again, going back to trust. So I grew up in a smaller village in the Netherlands, and in the past, every small village had their own Rabobank, right?
Hmm.
And the local bank director, he knew the entire village. They were sponsoring the local football club, and that was also purpose, right? There was community, there was purpose. You could trust them. Their kids went to the same school. Now, obviously, also due to digital transformation, a lot of stuff is centralizing, it's digitizing. Um, so how to keep that connection with your local customer in a world where you do have to centralize and make things more digital, more efficient? Isn't that a contradiction by itself?
Well, no, I think what's happening is a conglomeration of different things. So, on the one hand, you've got the climate crisis, mass inequality, the 99%, the issues around uh, the fact that so many people have been excluded from the network who now need to be or can be included. Um, you know, Wherever I look around the world, particularly in the southern hemisphere, it stuns me some of the things that are happening with financial inclusion. One of the banks in China is WeBank, run by Tencent, and the average cost to run an account within that bank, which is for blue collar workers who were unbanked, is less than $0.50 a year, 47 cents. And most banks, talk to any of your customers in the Netherlands, I bet the minimum they could get to is $20 a year for an account. Um, so that shows the disparity. And so what technology is driving inclusion, it's driving transparency. But more than that, I think that the nature of the way in which our planet is moving has made people much more aware of the issues that we face, which is why purpose is coming to the fore. And digital can support purpose. So, for example, to your illustration of the village in the Netherlands, to me, it's that scene in "It's a Wonderful Life" with Jimmy Stewart, a film from about 1947, I think, where there's a run on the bank. All the villagers come into the bank branch, and James Stewart says, "Look, you've got a mortgage with the bank that pays for Roger's house. Roger's got a mortgage with the bank that pays for John's house." And it's all about the links in community. Which, yes, in that illustration, it's a person in a branch, but I think we can do that digitally. Augmented by video. So you need to have people who are really good with relationships, which many banks have, and then augment them with video. But more than that, augment them with knowledge through AI about the customer as they have that video conversation. So it's not a chatbot, it's not an avatar, it's a human with deep knowledge of the bank's services and capabilities, the community, and the customer.
Yeah. Is that also how you see the future for video and maybe even personal customer interaction in finance? So technology, or actually human, but highly assisted with technology?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I used the example earlier that 80% of what we do will be dealt with by avatars and chatbots or video
Yeah.
bots. But when you get through to the human, because your question is not a run of the mill yes or no, 24%, whatever, it's specific to your needs and what you're doing at
Yes.
that time. When that gets passed over by the video bot to the Rutger, the human, then you'll be saying, "Oh, hi, Chris. I see you've been looking at our mortgage details, and I know you got this far through the application. How can I help you? And by the way, congratulations on your birthday last week." But
So
but
the
just to
human, yeah,
qualify that one, you've got to do it without being creepy,
yeah.
because knowing I had my birthday last week, if you throw that into conversation, I didn't give you permission. I might say, "Hey, I'm hanging up now because you're too weird."
Yeah, but the point you're making, I think, is that the human should have as much information or data or context available as a system would, but then the human can actually sort of use his creativity to combine that to basically advise or support the customer with their specific situation, their specific question in their
Yeah.
specific place.
Yeah, because if you look at survey after survey, research after research paper about AI and robotics, they consistently say the same thing, which is we will automate the mundane, but we will never automate the heart and the relationship. And so there will always be a need for counselors, for psychologists, for people who understand the human to human interaction. And within banking, for example, it came home to me when specifically I was thinking about mergers and acquisitions, because a merger acquisition process on paper is actually just numbers and contracts and investments. But in reality, is the most heart-rending thing that some people ever go through in their life, because they're losing their baby, their company. It's been acquired by a predator. In that process, you need people who can understand those human frailties.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's true, and it's the biggest cliche, but it is. I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but every person has it is unique and has its own unique situation, and it's so hard to just put people or situations in boxes, right? A machine might give you a good advice on all of the information it has right now, but then it might not know that you're planning to start a family, or that you're planning to relocate, or that maybe one of your parents is sick and you're planning to take them into your house to take care of them. There's so much uncertainty which is basically in the mind of the customer that you cannot automate with technology. And I think it's up to the human in the end to grab that context and then be this life partner for the customer.
Yeah, and I was dealing with a CEO of a financial company some years ago who made the comment that we've bred a culture of box tickers and button pushers. And
Yeah,
that's what we have to break out of. The machines can do the box ticking and the button pushing. We need our people to do the thinking.
yeah. All right. Let's talk about 2021. Let's leave 2020 behind us. I think everyone wants to do that. 2021. What should the banks be focusing on in 2021 in terms of customer experience? What should be the number one priority?
Most of what happened in the pandemic is tactical decision making to do what had to be done to enable working from home and service to home. In 2021, it's now more strategically taking the time to think about what does this mean to our business overall, and how strategically are we embedding ourselves in digital and the internet. And the best way to illustrate it is maybe that I keep talking about. Most banks became cloud based in 2020. In 2021, they need to be cloud native. Most banks have moved onto the internet in 2020. In 2021, they need to be looking as though they were born on the internet. Most banks were doing digital in the last years. Now they have to be digital. It's different.
Yeah, it's one of these memes, right? That was spreading out. I believe that Corona was their digital transformation officer, or
Yeah.
organizations had to become extremely agile, and I must say, I think a lot of organizations dealt with it very, very well. And they learned that they actually can be agile, right? When things are really under pressure, they can be super agile. So they dealt with it, and indeed, what we also see, for example, with respect to video. So yes, they've implemented it, works, it technically works, and now the question they're asking is, okay, but how to make it a great customer experience? How to use it intelligently? How to embed it onto the website with the right triggers, with the right intelligence? How to make sure it's compliant? And that's basically also what you're saying. We dealt with it, but now how to actually take the next step forward with it.
Yeah, and there's a huge number of themes again that I'm talking about consistently, but the majority of banks, even today, are not actually doing digital transformation properly. They think it's a project that they can assign to a chief digital officer who reports to the chief financial officer and has a team and a budget to implement digital, whereas that's complete baloney. That's not ever going to achieve anything. In fact, I blogged about it the other day. About 80 out of every 100 euros that banks are spending on digital transformation is washed down the toilet. It's wasted. And the reason for that is that it's not making strategic change. It's just assigning something to a tactical implementation of technology. And strategically, going back to everything I've said so far in this chat around, you've got to be digital, not just do digital. You've got to have digital transformation, which is changing people's heads, not changing technology. You've got to actually work out how to be born on the internet and have a business model born for the internet age, not just evolve your old industrial model. You've got to make that a seriously transformational program led by the chief executive and chairman and the board and the executive leadership team, and make sure that that team not only is passionate and making it happen, but that they have the balance of people who both understand digital and technology as well as banking and finance. BBVA, I was really surprised when I was interviewing their executive, chief executive and chairman, because over half of their operational leadership team are technology or telecommunications people.
Yeah, and that's what it takes. That's what it takes to drive real change.
Yeah, they've got a head of engineering, a head of data, a head of customer experience, obviously a CIO, but equally the chief executive came from a telco. And all of that wraps up into a really good balanced decision-making team. If you only have one guy on the team who understands technology, that's not going to cut the mustard. And in fact, most banks I deal with, they don't even have a technologist in that discussion. They have the CFO, and the CIO reports to the CFO, and the CDO reports to the CIO, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. All right, Chris. With that, I'm gonna thank you for the interview. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. It's obvious again that you are probably a couple years ahead with your with your thinking, but we need these kind of conversations, I think, to bring the market forward. So thanks a lot, Chris. And yeah, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Rutger. Watch out for the elephant in the room.